Coming up on The World Today. Vote counting continues in a handful of key battleground states as Trump campaigning launches legal bids to stop the counts. Kosovo leader Thaçi resigns over war crimes charges. Plus, officials warn of tough fines as new lockdowns begin in England. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Akaite Afia. Another day and the wait for the U.S. presidential election result continues. There are now just a handful of states up for grabs to determine the final outcome of the election. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden currently has 243 Electoral College votes, and Republican President Donald Trump 214. They need 270 to win the White House. Meanwhile, the Trump campaign has launched legal bids to stop the counts in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Michigan. It has so far won the court ruling to gain access to the Philadelphia vote counting.
This afternoon, the Trump campaign filed a lawsuit to stop the counting of ballots in Pennsylvania. That is simply wrong. It goes against the most basic principles of our democracy. Our election officials at the state and local levels should be free to do their jobs without fear, without intimidation, without attacks. These attempts to subvert the democratic process are simply disgraceful.
Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf vows to defend every vote cast in the state. This comes as the Trump campaign files lawsuits in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Michigan to hold vote counting while arguing that officials have failed to allow fair access to counting sites.
Not a single Republican has been able to look at any one of these mail ballots. They could be from Mars as far as we're concerned, or they could be from the Democratic National Committee. Joe Biden could have voted 50 times.
Though an unprecedented move is in U.S. history to launch a legal challenge while votes are still being counted, it seems some U.S. citizens are not surprised.
Hasn't he already said that if he loses, he's going to dispute it anyway? So he's already stated that. If he loses in any type of way, he's not going to lose graciously. He's going to make a big deal about it. He was cheated in any type of way.
However, Democrat Joe Biden says he's expecting victory because it's clear his campaign is winning enough states to win the presidency.
And now, after a long night of counting, it's clear that we're winning enough states to reach 270 electoral votes needed to win the presidency. I'm not here to declare that we've won, but I am here to report when the count is finished, we believe we will be the winners.
Meanwhile, protests have sprung up in some cities amid rising tensions over the knife-edge count in battleground states. In Portland, Oregon, the National Guard were activated after an anti-Trump protest calling for every vote to be counted turned violent. In New York, police arrested at least 50 people on Wednesday night following protests earlier in the day. Protesters wound through Manhattan streets throughout the afternoon and evening in demonstrations demanding a thorough count of ballots cast in the U.S. presidential race, calling for racial justice and criticizing police. Similar protests were also reported in Minneapolis, Philadelphia, and Chicago. In Detroit, Michigan, pro-Trump supporters gathered outside the vote counting center, banging on windows and shouting, "Stop the count." A small anti-count protest was also reported in Phoenix, Arizona. In the meantime, Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden has the support of 70.5 million voters, the most won by any presidential candidate ever. Mr. Trump has pulled in 67.2 million votes, 4 million more than he gained in 2016. The bitter election race was dominated by the coronavirus pandemic, which hit a new record high of 103,000 daily cases in the U.S. on Wednesday.
VOA correspondent Cindy Sain joins us now for an update on the election results. Cindy, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
So I think the million-dollar question right now is how soon can we get the results? Where are we at?
Well, that is absolutely the million-dollar question. And believe me, we are still on pins and needles here, a bit sleep-deprived and having too much coffee and trying to figure all this out. But as we stand now, it's interesting because we're still focusing on some of these battleground states, as you reported. Let's take Arizona, for example, in the Southwest. There, it would seem that Vice President Biden's lead is dwindling somewhat. I'm hearing about 400,000 ballots still to be counted. I think President Trump's campaign is probably feeling good about that. But Democrats are saying, well, a lot of those votes are going to come from mainly Democratic areas. So we'll just have to wait and see. What I am hearing now is that we may get those votes tallies 9 p.m. Their time there. So it's sometime late this evening here in the U.S. In other states, for example, in the southern state of Georgia, which is normally solid Republican, it's exactly the opposite way around, where President Trump had a commanding lead, and he's seen that evaporate down to maybe around 135,000 votes. And it is the metro Atlanta area, predominantly African-American, strong Democratic stronghold, where most of the votes are still expected to be counting. So basically, it's still a very close race. Yes, Biden has more paths, let's say, has a clearer path to victory, but it is not over yet.
Well, the Trump campaign has launched a legal bid to stop the vote count in some states, swing states at that. If the president does lose the election, it doesn't seem like he's going to go down without a fight. So what legal action can he take in this instance?
You're correct. He has launched lawsuits in several states and in most of these battleground states at this point. And it's a bit ironic, for example, in Michigan, you saw there in Detroit some of his Trump supporters outside the election offices saying, stop the count. Well, at the moment, Vice President Biden is leading. So if the count were stopped, as President Trump's campaign lawsuit also wants, then Biden would be ahead. So some legal experts, we here at VOA have spoken to a number of law professors. Some say that these lawsuits are more perhaps meant as a public relations measure to say, wait a minute, this is not a done deal. President Trump may be behind, but there might be some fishy business going on. But some legal experts are doubting whether these lawsuits would truly have merit. Now, that may be a little different in Wisconsin, where there is a system in place for a recount, and the Trump campaign has demanded a recount, and that's not the first time that has happened. But there again, experts say, we've done these recounts before. Usually there's a difference maybe of a couple hundred votes. It's probably not enough to change the outcome. And so far, Vice President Biden expected to win there in Wisconsin.
Well, we also understand that the Trump campaign has won a court ruling to gain access to Philadelphia vote counting. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Right. Pennsylvania seems to be very, very crucial. And I'm not sure what a difference that is actually going to make on the number of votes counted. But it is another tremendous focal point now with the Biden campaign saying they're very confident that when it's all counted that they're going to win Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is Biden's birth state. But we'll just have to see. But the Biden campaign projecting confidence, and even some Republican pollsters saying President Trump basically has to win at this stage, since he's behind right now in the vote. He has to win Pennsylvania and Arizona, or it's over for him.
And Cindy, just one more question before I let you go. We've seen a wave of unprecedented protests erupting across the country. So what are authorities doing to restore calm?
Well, you're right. And there, as you said, there have been clashes in Minneapolis and Portland and other areas. As you reported, Portland sent in the National Guard. In Minneapolis, police surrounded protesters who were on an interstate blocking a road. In Raleigh, North Carolina, there were some arrests for unlawful demonstrations. So tensions are running high on all sides. In Arizona, you have Trump supporters, some of them heavily armed, outside election offices. So it is a bit, tensions are running high right now. Authorities are trying their best to keep order, and poll workers are working long hours and just trying to count the votes so we can know who won this election fair and square.
Well, we'll definitely be watching to see what the outcome is. Cindy, thanks so much for talking to us today.
Thank you for having me.
In the meantime, as the world waits for the results, reactions to the electoral process have been coming in. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison says he is confident that the democratic process in the U.S. will prevail despite election uncertainty. Prime Minister Morrison refused to speculate on the outcome of the respect for the United States and says he will remain patient for the official results.
Well, the great thing about the United States, it is a great democracy, and it does have great institutions. And we have a deep and wide relationship with the United States, which is incredibly important to Australia. We are both like-minded and like in so many ways. Our values, our partnerships, economic, security, and in so many ways. And I have great confidence in the democracy of the United States. And I have great confidence in their institutions. And the thing about great institutions and democracies is they deal with whatever challenges come, just like our own does. And that's why I express confidence. I think, a great democracy, having a great election with the greatest turnout it's ever seen in its history, is actually a demonstration of democracy working. I'm not a participant in the US political process. I am a partner. Australia is a partner with the United States, and we respect the decisions that the American people make in their democracy. And we'll be patient and we'll await the outcome of their process. It's not for me to run a commentary on those things, and I won't. I work with the President of the United States as the Prime Minister of Australia, and I've enjoyed a very productive working relationship with the President.
Meanwhile, New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she will work with whomever becomes the President of the United States, adding that she feels her country had done a good job in maintaining its relationship with the United States.
As votes are still being counted, I think the whole world waits for the final outcome in the United States. But of course, we continue to have faith in those institutions, as I'm sure they do. As I've said, our view is that the votes obviously are still to be counted, and so there is no final outcome at this stage to comment on. As you will have heard from me say a number of times, my job in this role as Prime Minister is to work with whomever another country decides should be their leader, in the same way that New Zealand expects every other country to work with whomever they elect as Prime Minister.
Well, to other stories now, Kosovo President Hashim Thaçi has resigned from office, announcing that a special court at The Hague is indicting him for war crimes. There was no immediate confirmation from The Hague, but a special prosecutor submitted accusations in June covering Kosovo's 1998 to 99 independence war against Serbia. Mr. Thaçi denies any wrongdoing. His decision comes hours after veteran Kosovo politician Jakub Krasniqi was arrested and taken to The Hague. Mr. Krasniqi, a 69-year-old former spokesman for the Kosovo Liberation Army, also known as KLA, who is also a former Kosovo president, was detained in a raid at his home by EU police. He faces charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Still to come on The World Today. Hong Kong police set up a hotline that allows people to report breaches of the national security law anonymously. Details in just a moment. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Police in Hong Kong have launched a hotline where residents can report breaches of the national security law imposed by Beijing earlier this year. The law criminalizes secession, subversion, and collusion with foreign forces. It has silenced many protesters since it came into force. Hong Kong residents can send images, audio, and video files to the hotline anonymously. Rights groups say they are concerned the service could be used to target those with opposing political views. In England, Justice Secretary Robert Buckland warns that people who seriously flout the new lockdown restrictions will face steep fines. Under the rules, people have been told to stay at home, and non-essential shops, pubs, and gyms have been ordered to close. Households are also banned from mixing indoors or in private gardens unless in a support bubble. Currently, there is a £200 fine for each breach, which doubles on every offense up to a maximum of £6,400. And organizers of large gatherings face a £10,000 fine. Our London correspondent, Juliana Olayinka, joins us now for more on this. Juliana, welcome to the program. So tell us, people who flout these new London restrictions face fines ranging from £200 to as high as £10,000. So far, how has the level of compliance been?
Far so good. I was on a commute this morning, and even though it didn't have those eerie scenes that we saw in March when the entire country was locked down, you definitely had a sense that people were taking it seriously, and without the workers going into non-essential stores, working in the hospitality sector, the roads are definitely a lot clearer. But yesterday was called Lockdown Eve, and despite the fact that there are tiered restrictions, or there were tiered restrictions across most of the country, particularly in the northeast and the northwest of regions, people were celebrating their final night out. I think a lot of people were jumping through the loopholes, the legal loopholes, eating indoors with individuals that weren't from their same bubble. And no matter what, even though there is a disputed election ongoing in the United States of America, here in Britain, what was trending yesterday on Twitter was cancel lockdown. So I think there are two camps of individuals. There are those who think it's completely unnecessary. These aren't just members of the public. These are also members of Prime Minister Boris Johnson's own government who don't believe that the data backs up the facts and believe their civil liberties are being torn apart by requesting that they stay indoors. But there are others who are just sick to death of COVID-19 and its limiting restrictions, and they want to get this completely over and done with. And if staying indoors or not mixing socially for the next 4 weeks is going to reduce the spread of the infection, then so be it.
Well, unlike the first lockdown in March, schools, universities, and nurseries will remain open. So how is this meant to work? Aren't there fears of educational institutions being a hub for transmission?
Yes, the education sector does remain open, and that is the case. I think the Prime Minister has said time and time again in the Commons over the past couple of weeks that the government will try to keep them open for as long as possible. And it's really difficult for critics or opponents to argue against that, because we did see during the first lockdown just how young children from disadvantaged backgrounds or less privileged backgrounds or poorer children really suffered. I think online education has been difficult for not just Britain, but other countries around the world to try and grapple with. It's much more difficult if you are living in a house that doesn't have access to laptops, doesn't have access to parents that understand how to communicate with children. So I think that was the greatest fear. And both benches from across the House of Commons were pretty clear that the most important aspect of the lockdown is to maintain children's education, to ensure that children's mental health is stimulated, that they're still able to socialise. But, you know, the picture isn't the same across every part of the country. There are some schools that are having to close down. There are many schools in London that were not able to open on time. Of course, as you said, yes, children can indeed spread COVID-19 faster than adults. It's not as deadly deadly, of course, in them. The data shows us that they are less likely to become seriously ill if they contract COVID-19. But of course, they can still pass it on to their parents and to their loved ones. So that is still a concern. And we have had teachers' unions calling on the government to shut down the schools. But I think overwhelmingly, not just the British government, not just the Labour opposition party, but the British public as a whole haven't spoken out against schools being open, because we know just how important the education sector is for the future of our children.
All right. Well, Juliana, thanks so much for joining us today, and please stay safe out there. Meanwhile, Greece has ordered the nationwide lockdown for 3 weeks as the coronavirus cases continue to reach new heights in the country. Under the new country-wide restrictions, which will take effect from Saturday, all retail businesses will be shut, with the exception of supermarkets, healthcare services, and pharmacies. Residents will need a permit to venture outdoors. Restaurants, bars, cafes, theaters, museums, and gyms had already been closed from Tuesday, but only in high-risk areas and not nationwide. Primary schools will stay open, but high schools will be shut. The country has reported fewer cases than most in Europe, mainly due to an early nationwide lockdown that it imposed when the pandemic broke out in February. Since early October, it has seen a large surge in infections and has been reimposing curbs. Well, that is all for the world today. I'm Akaite Afia. Have a great day and stay safe.